The days after the whole Trailgate mess felt like living in some dystopian comedy. Every time I walked past that twisted chunk of metal and keypad, I had to fight the urge to go full Mad Max on it. But instead of grabbing a sledgehammer, I opened a manila folder packed with printed county documents, zoning maps, and old land parcel scans. The more I looked, the stranger it all got. That narrow strip of overgrown land that Karen's road cut through was almost invisible on today's maps, which explained why the HOA never bothered with it. But the county records told a different story. According to those files, it was a 0.52-acre patch designated as agricultural buffer land, privately owned, not part of the HOA, and registered under a name I hadn't heard in years, Harold B. Cormarmack. That name triggered a memory. Old man Cormarmack used to sell eggs at a roadside stand when I was a kid. He owned a huge farm, most of which had been sold off to developers long ago. I hadn't heard anything about him in ages, but I guessed he wasn't the type to put much faith in HOAs. I tracked down an out-of-state address and sent him a letter, then followed up with a call. No answer. I left a courteous voicemail explaining who I was and why I was reaching out. 3 days later, he called back. His voice was rough but steady. When I told him the HOA had been using his land without permission for a private road, he laughed so hard he started coughing. He told me he had refused to sell that strip when the development began because they lowballed him. He called it his little act of rebellion. They never respected the land, so he never granted them access. When I asked if he'd be willing to sell it to me, he said, sure. He liked the idea of a local putting the HOA in their place. The deal went surprisingly smoothly. He faxed over the paperwork, I got it notarized, wired the payment, and by the end of the week, I officially owned the land that provided the only road in and out of Karen's HOA subdivision. It still didn't feel real. One morning, coffee in hand, I stood there staring at the cracked asphalt cutting right across my property line. The irony was delicious. Karen had blocked a public trail because she thought she was entitled to her quiet little slice of peace, and now, without realizing it, she and her entire community were driving across my land every single day. All I had to do was wait. I didn't go nuclear right away. That wasn't my plan. I wasn't out to hurt anyone, just to make a point. So I started small. I put up 2 simple signs on either side of the road. Nothing flashy. They read, "Private property, entry by permission only." Below, in smaller print, "Landowner contact info available at county clerk's office." That alone stirred things up. Within 48 hours, HOA members started noticing the signs. Someone snapped a photo and posted it on the community Facebook page with the caption, "What the heck is this?" The comments blew up. Some thought it was a prank. Others guessed the county was planning something new. Karen, true to form, claimed vandalism and threatened to call the sheriff. She actually did. I was home when the deputy showed up, the same guy who had dealt with the paramedic mess before. I calmly showed him my new deed, explained the situation, even offered him coffee. He shook his head in disbelief and said, "Well, technically, you can do a lot more than just put up signs." He warned me Karen would probably try to escalate, but as long as I wasn't blocking traffic or denying access, I was within my rights. I thanked him and stood by the road just as Karen stormed over from her house, fuming like she'd just lost a baking contest to her nemesis. She shouted across the street, demanding to know what I thought I was doing. I pointed at the sign and said simply, "My land, my rules." The next move was mine, but I still didn't want unnecessary chaos. I decided to install a straightforward barrier, nothing elaborate, just a swinging arm gate like you'd find on a Forest Service road. I posted a formal notice giving the HOA 72 hours to contact me about a formal access agreement. I even drafted a sample lease for road use in exchange for reopening the trail and coordinating community trail cleanup. Fair and reasonable. But Karen didn't see it that way. She called an emergency HOA meeting and accused me of holding their neighborhood hostage. She tried to rally the homeowners to sue me, but cracks started to show. Some residents began asking tough questions. Why hadn't the HOA secured legal access earlier? Why had they spent money on a trail gate before confirming their rights to the road? That weekend, things got serious. I had contractors install the swing gate and a motion camera, The gate wasn't locked, just positioned to make cars slow down and pass one at a time, but the uproar was immediate. Karen filmed herself dramatically slamming on the brakes, pretending she couldn't get through. She posted the video to the neighborhood group with the caption, "This is what tyranny looks like." Naturally, I screen recorded it. She edited the video, splicing it together with footage of her refusing to open the trail gate for paramedics, then posted it on Reddit titled, "Ho Karen Meets Land Karma." Overnight, it blew up at thousands of upvotes and dozens of reaction videos flooded in. One commenter summed it up perfectly: "This guy just reversed an entire HO." But the backlash was only getting started. The rest of the HO board, eager to get ahead of the negative publicity, reached out to me behind Karen's back. They wanted to negotiate a compromise, worried the whole ordeal might hurt property values. I agreed to meet them on my land. Naturally, Karen wasn't invited, but she showed up anyway, pacing outside the gate like an agitated security guard. The board members apologized profusely, claiming they had no idea Karen's trail gate was unauthorized and promising to look into it. I laid out my terms clearly: remove the gate within 7 days, restore trail access, and issue a public apology to the community. In return, I'd offer a renewable road easement with no yearly fees. This should have settled things, but Karen wasn't interested in peace. The next morning, I found a cease and desist letter slipped into my mailbox, accusing me of blocking public infrastructure and threatening legal action. She'd even printed it on whole letterhead without the board's approval. I sent a copy to the county's legal office and waited. The county responded with a formal review request concerning both the road access and Karen's unauthorized gate. Suddenly, she was under scrutiny from every angle. Yet, she doubled down at hosting community meetings where she claimed I was a squatter trying to steal whole land. She even pushed residents to sign a petition demanding eminent domain seizure of my property. That's when I decided to go public. I wrote a calm, fact-based post summarizing the whole story: how the trail was illegally blocked, how I legally purchased the access land, and how I offered a peaceful resolution. I included photos of county documents, Karen's texts, and images showing the gate blocking emergency crews. No drama needed, as the truth spoke for itself. The post went viral again. News stations reached out, hiker groups organized small protests near the blocked trail, and home members started coming to me privately to apologize. Some even offered to help clean the trail themselves. That's when it hit me: I wasn't just fighting Karen anymore. I was awakening a community. The war wasn't over, but momentum had shifted. Karen built a gate to control a trail. I bought a road to defend a principle. And now, the very neighbors she claimed to represent were beginning to question if she was really the hero of their story. I never expected my little experiment with those 2 plain signs to stir up so much trouble so quickly. The moment they went up, it was like I'd poked a hornet's nest marinating in entitlement for years. Karen's reaction was swift and theatrical. The morning after the signs appeared, I watched from my kitchen window as she marched over, like a general leading troops into battle. She stood with hands on hips, reading each sign aloud with exaggerated outrage. Then she pulled out her phone, snapping photos from every angle before filming herself in selfie mode. She spun a dramatic tale about the trail anarchist waging war on the peaceful citizens of her neighborhood. She called me a rogue squatter, accusing me of fabricating a fake land claim just to cause chaos. The camera panned to my modest wooden fence as she sneered, "This is what happens when you let outsiders buy property next to a respectable community." Outsider. I'd lived here longer than half the HO had owned their homes. That afternoon, a uniformed officer showed up, and not hostile, just curious. He'd gotten a call about a potential land use violation and wanted to take a look. I invited him inside, offered a cold drink, and laid out all the paperwork. The deed was clean, the zoning status current, and the parcel unquestionably mine. He reviewed everything carefully, then nodded and said it all checked out. Before leaving, he leaned in and said off the record, "You've got her in a panic. Half the HO is calling the station, trying to figure out if you can legally shut them out." I smiled and replied, "Only if they leave me no choice." For a while, things went quiet. Karen didn't confront me again for about 3 days, which was unusual. I assumed she was regrouping, planning her next legal move. I had no idea how far she was ready to go. On the fourth morning, I found bright orange cones lining the access road through my land. Right at the center of my property line, someone had spray-painted a crooked white stripe and placed a laminated sign smack in the middle of the asphalt reading, "Temporary HOA Authority under review." It was laughably fake. No permit number, no county seal, nothing official at all. It looked like something a bored teenager would slap together as a prank. Yet, there it stood, blocking everyone's morning commute. I called the county and sent them photos. They responded quickly, declaring the sign unauthorized and advising me to remove it. I did just that. I pulled the plastic sign down and tossed the cones near my shed. That night, Karen stormed up to the road again, shouting from across the fence, "You're tampering with official signage." I told her she should try applying for a legitimate permit next time. Her face flushed bright enough to fry an egg. Not one to back down, she started rallying support, calling a community meeting, slipping flyers under doors, and spreading rumors that I planned to turn the trail into a private campground for profit. Some neighbors actually bought into it. A few who used to greet me stopped making eye contact. One even said their kid had cried because they couldn't bike down the trail and blamed me for shutting it. It stung, but I knew confrontation wouldn't fix this. The only way forward was exposure. So, over the next few evenings, I put together a digital dossier. It included county records confirming the trail's public status, photos of the original signage before Karen removed it, and the trail's history with the community. I added a copy of my property deed, maps showing how the access road overlapped with my land, and timestamps documenting the emergency response delay during the bike accident. Then, I wrote a clear, composed titled, "Why the Trail is Closed and What the HOA Doesn't Want You to Know." I shared it on the local neighborhood app and several hiker forums. Within 24 hours, the comments blew up. The community wasn't as blind as Karen thought. Several longtime residents recalled hiking the trail as kids. One woman posted a photo of her grandfather building one of the original trail markers back in the 70s. A former HOA board member admitted they once tried to reclassify the trail as HOA property but failed. The tide turned fast. Suddenly, the questions shifted, not about me, but about Karen. The pressure mounted quickly. A few homeowners confronted her directly at an HOA meeting. Someone recorded the showdown and uploaded it online. There she was, gripping the podium with white knuckles, trying to explain she was just protecting neighborhood safety. A man in the audience shouted, "From WADA joggers and squirrels?" That line got clipped and reposted as a meme. Karen versus squirrels, the final showdown. It went viral on local Reddit threads. Karen fought back the only way she knew, filing what she called a cease and desist letter against me. It was stuffed in my mailbox with no postage, no lawyer's name, and printed in what looked like Comic Sans. The letter accused me of disturbing community peace, endangering traffic, and threatening HOA stability. It warned that continued interference would bring legal consequences. I read it twice and laughed so hard I almost dropped it in my coffee. Still, I scanned it and sent it to the county's legal liaison just to be safe. They reassured me the letter had no legal weight and could even be considered harassment, depending on how far she pushed it. They encouraged me to keep detailed records and offered mediation resources in case the HOA tried to escalate things officially. I filed the letter away in my growing folder labeled Karen Chronicles. Meanwhile, the swing gate was nearly finished. I'd hired a small crew to install it at the end of my property, right over the access road. It wasn't meant to block anything, just to control traffic flow and clearly mark that the land wasn't free for the taking. I chose a wooden design to blend with the forest and added solar lights for visibility. It opened smoothly, no locks or barricades, just a clear presence. On the day it went up, I stood beside it, arms crossed, watching the first cars approach. They hesitated, then slowly passed through. Some drivers waved, one gave me a thumbs up. Karen drove by last, glaring at the gate like it personally insulted her mother. That night, she posted a furious rant online accusing me of erecting illegal barriers on essential travel routes and making unauthorized land alterations. She claimed I was once again endangering emergency services even though the fire department had already inspected and approved the gate as non-restrictive. The next day, a local news crew showed up, They'd followed the Reddit thread and Facebook drama and wanted an interview. I walked them through the timeline, showed them the trail, the fake gate, the accident, the road purchase. I didn't have to embellish anything, the facts were wild enough. Karen declined to comment but sent a statement riddled with errors and vague accusations about an aggressive neighbor trying to destabilize our peaceful community. The segment aired that evening, and within hours, the fallout was explosive. Karen's credibility crumbled. Parents who lost access to their favorite hiking spot demanded action. A group of teenagers organized a peaceful protest with signs reading, "Unlock the trail, hiking isn't a crime." HOA board members started receiving anonymous letters demanding a vote to remove Karen from her position. I hadn't even finalized the road lease agreement yet, and already the pressure was fracturing the power structure she'd built. That's when I realized the real fight wouldn't be won with gates or fences. It would be fought with information, community support, and legal precision. And Karen? She was finally learning that sometimes, when you try to gate the world out, you end up locking yourself in. The morning after the news aired, everything felt oddly quiet, like the calm before a summer storm. My gate stood silently across the access road, modest and unmoving, and not a barricade, but a statement. Birds chirped, a gentle breeze rustled the trees. The wind rustled through the tall grass along the edge of my property as I sipped my morning coffee. A few early commuters slowed slightly as they passed through the newly installed gate. No honking, no confrontations, just a quiet acknowledgement that things had changed. That silent respect from the neighborhood felt like a collective nod in my direction. But peace never lasts long, not with Karen stewing on the other side of the subdivision, bruised by public backlash and hungry to reclaim control. Around mid-morning, I heard the unmistakable staccato of heels tapping against pavement. I didn't even need to look up. Karen stood at the far edge of the access road, arms folded tightly, oversized sunglasses perched on her nose, and a clipboard gripped like it was a broadsword. She didn't technically step onto my land, but her voice sure made itself at home in the air. She accused me loudly of conspiring with the media to humiliate her, orchestrating a cyber harassment campaign by encouraging people to comment on HOA posts, and violating some imaginary clause about community stability. When I asked her to cite that clause in the county code, she sputtered, turned on her heel, and stormed back toward the cul-de-sac in a dramatic flurry. Later that afternoon, 2 HOA board members showed up, and without her. These weren't the chest-thumping types like Karen. They looked tired, worn down. They admitted, with careful diplomacy, that she had gone rogue. The fake signs, the bogus cease and desist, the refusal to listen to anyone who didn't echo her worldview, why it was all becoming a major liability. They asked, respectfully, if I'd attend the upcoming HOA meeting, and not as an outsider, but as someone whose voice needed to be heard. They wanted to talk solutions. I agreed on one condition: the illegal gate across the trail had to come down within 7 days. They hesitated, said it would require a vote, but promised to bring it to the table. The HOA meeting was held at the local clubhouse. I half expected a circus, but what I walked into was something else entirely. The room was packed, not with hecklers, but with neighbors. Some brought their own chairs, others leaned against walls, a few nodded as I entered. 1 or 2 quietly whispered, "Thank you." Karen sat at the front table, looking dwarfed by a chair too large for her and glaring at me like I'd crashed a royal banquet. The meeting opened with the usual agenda items of fence heights, mailbox placements, but no one cared. Then the topic shifted to the trail and the access road. The room tightened. Karen launched into a prepared speech about liability, safety, and how the trail had become a magnet for vagrancy. She claimed to have received anonymous complaints from residents who no longer felt safe using the parks due to hiker spillover. She even waved around some blurry photos of people walking dogs and riding bikes as if they were criminals. Someone in the crowd laughed, loudly. It threw her off. Then a resident stood up and asked, "If safety was your concern, why did you block paramedics from reaching that injured kid?" Karen stammered, blamed it on miscommunication, and then predictably accused me of manipulating the public. That was my cue. I stepped forward with my folder in hand, calm, direct, no theatrics. I presented the deed to the access road, the county's official response to her unauthorized signage, and documents proving the trail's public status. I explained how the trail had existed long before the HOA ever did, how I'd maintained it out of pocket, and how the only thing I wanted in return was mutual respect. I even showed the lease proposal or road access in exchange for reopening the trail. No money, no strings, just goodwill. By the time I finished, the room was still. Then, from the back, an elderly gentleman leaned forward and said, "That's the best HOA proposal I've ever heard." Karen tried to claw back control. She shouted about legal consequences, claimed false easements, rattled off incoherent threats, but it was over. The board called for a vote right then and there. Accept the lease, remove the gate. Out of 38 homes, 34 voted yes, 2 abstained. Only Karen and her closest loyalist voted number. Just like that, the HOA officially agreed to take down the gate. Karen stood up and stormed out, slamming the clubhouse door behind her. It would be the last time she ever presided over an HOA meeting. 2 days later, the gate came down. I was there to watch every bolt unscrewed. A small crowd gathered, the neighbors, hikers, a few reporters jotting notes. One guy from a local YouTube channel streamed the whole thing live. When the last piece of metal hit the ground, someone cheered, someone else brought donuts. It turned into an impromptu celebration. Parents with kids on bikes took turns riding the trail for the first time in weeks. Joggers high-fived. My dog Max, who had quietly observed every chapter of this saga, finally got to chase his tennis ball the full length of the trail without any barriers. I hadn't seen him run like that since he was a puppy. With the trail reopened and the gate gone, the entire mood in the neighborhood shifted. People who used to avoid eye contact now waved. Some stopped to chat. A few even asked how they could help keep the trail clean. A local teacher sent me a thank you card. It said their students used the trail for science walks. The same little boy who had cried when it was closed came by with a drawing, a giant gate with a red X over it, and a stick figure in a cape labeled Trail Hero. I pinned it to the fridge. But Karen didn't vanish entirely. Over the next week, she filed 3 separate complaints with the zoning board, sent 2 anonymous letters to the editor of the local newspaper, and even attempted to start a petition to overturn the HOA's decision. None of it stuck. The board voted formally to remove her from any leadership role, citing misconduct and a long string of unilateral decisions. Her one remaining ally on the board resigned without a word. The HOA followed up with a community-wide newsletter, this time not filled with legalese or scolding tones. It included a formal apology and laid out a new direction built around transparency and collaboration. It was a shift, not just recovery from chaos but actual reinvention. A few days later, I returned to the spot where the gate once stood. I brought with me a simple wooden sign I had carved by hand. Clean lines, no frills. It read, "Welcome to Willow Trail. Respect nature, respect neighbors." I installed it with Max sitting beside me, tail thumping against the ground as I tightened the last bolt. A young couple pushing a stroller passed by. They stopped, admired the sign, and thanked me. I nodded quietly, feeling something inside finally settle. It wasn't victory, not revenge, either, just balance. Karen still lived down the street. Her house had a for sale sign up. Word around the neighborhood was she was planning to move closer to her sister, out of state. As for me, I had no intention of going anywhere. My roots were too deep. Too many memories lived in these trees and trails. And now, a renewed certainty. When you fight with patience, clarity, and just enough stubbornness, the truth has a way of cutting through the noise. That evening, as the sun dropped behind the woods, casting gold across the reopened path, I sat on the old bench I built years ago. Kids biked beneath the trees, couples walked hand in hand, dogs bounded through tall grass. The trail was alive again, and with it, the community it had always quietly connected. I had thought once the gate was removed and the trail reopened, things would fall into a new rhythm, one where peace replaced pettiness, and reason overtook chaos. And for a while, they did. Neighbors who once hid behind closed blinds now strolled the path. People smiled. The HOA sent out its first friendly newsletter in years, thanking residents for their input and announcing a community planting day. They even invited me to lead the opening ceremony for the newly restored trail. I declined politely. I preferred to watch from a quiet distance, thermos in hand, Max at my feet. But I should have known it. Karen still lived just 5 houses down from the trail entrance. And peace, it turned out, had an expiration date. At first, she kept her distance. No shouting from her driveway, no confrontational HOA posts, no mysterious complaints. Too quiet, the kind of silence that feels staged. Then one afternoon, I came home to find a small wooden structure planted right in the middle of the trail and not far from where her property backed into the trees. It looked like a glorified lemonade stand. Hanging from the top beam was a hand-painted sign, HOA Security Checkpoint. Below it, all trail visitors must sign in. There was a fold-out table beneath, a notebook, and a pen. I stood there blinking, unsure if I was hallucinating. I didn't touch it, just walked right past and waited. Not 10 minutes later, Karen emerged from the woods like she was on patrol. She wore a reflective safety vest and had a walkie-talkie clipped to her hip. She waved her arm like she was flagging down a car and barked, "You didn't sign in." I asked, "Sign in for what, exactly?" She launched into a ramble about increased security and tracking trail usage. I reminded her again that the trail was public land. There was no legal requirement for anyone to log their presence. She replied, "Well, the HOA has its own standards. We can enforce additional procedures for bordering residents." "No," I said. "You really can't." Her eyes narrowed. "Maybe a court should decide." I laughed, took a picture, and walked away. That evening, I posted the photo online. It didn't take long for local forums to pick it up. The comments were ruthless. People joked about her starting a border checkpoint. One user photoshopped her face onto a military general's body with the caption, "General Karen, defending the homeland one trail at a time." Another created a fake HOA passport graphic that read, "Valid for one walk only. Please don't breathe too loud." But beneath the humor, the issue was real. She was escalating again, and now her theatrics were encroaching on public property. I sent the photo and a formal complaint to the county parks office. To their credit, they acted fast. A ranger arrived the next day to inspect the trail. I watched from my window as he approached the makeshift booth, scribbled something in his notebook, and then knocked on Karen's door. She came out arguing before he even said a word. I couldn't hear the exchange, but I saw the animated gesture as her pointing at the trees like they marked some invisible line only she could see. Eventually, the ranger pulled out a cordless drill and began unscrewing the wooden structure from the ground. She stood there defeated, still muttering under her breath, as the ranger loaded the wooden booth into the back of his truck. I thought that would be the end of it. It wasn't. 3 days later, Karen filed yet another complaint, this time accusing me of operating an unauthorized commercial business on land adjacent to the community. She claimed I was charging hikers for private tours and running some sort of illegal outdoor fitness class. The HOA was required to address it during their next meeting. It didn't go well for her. Not only were her claims completely baseless, but 2 of the people she accused of being my clients were, in fact, HOA members themselves, one of whom was a retired librarian who hosted weekend poetry walks on the trail. After the laughter died down, the board issued a formal censure against Karen, warning her officially and reminding all residents that the HOA had absolutely no authority over county-managed land. Karen left the meeting in silence, but her face was red enough to stop traffic. That's when she disappeared from public view and started working from the shadows. Over the next few weeks, odd things started happening. One morning, I arrived to find trash scattered across the trailhead of plastic wrappers, shredded paper, even shards of broken glass. I cleaned it up, assuming it was a random act of littering, but then it happened again, and again. I eventually installed a motion-activated camera hidden in the bushes near the entrance. It didn't take long to catch the culprit. There she was, tiptoeing under cover of night, wearing pajamas, dragging a bag of garbage, and tossing it onto the trail like some raccoon in heels before scurrying back toward her house. I didn't post the footage publicly. Not yet. Instead, I handed it over to the sheriff's office, along with a detailed cleanup log and timestamps. They paid her a visit. Karen claimed she was spreading biodegradable compost to enrich the soil. They informed her that crushed soda cans, candy wrappers, and old receipts didn't count as compost. Next came the flyers of bright neon sheets taped to utility poles around the neighborhood. They warned residents of unregulated wildlife activity near the trail and urged people to report suspicious animal behavior. It would have been laughably if it weren't borderline slander. One of the flyers included a blurry photo of my dog, Max, with a red circle drawn around him and the words "potential threat" scribbled underneath. That was the line. I had tolerated the gate, the lies, the complaints about targeting Max. That was personal. So I responded, not with fury but with focus. I organized a Trail Appreciation Day, invited the local ranger to give a talk, got a county representative to speak about public land access, even brought in a few local vendors to set up small booths for hikers and nature lovers. More than 70 people showed up. Kids painted birdhouses, seniors went on guided nature walks. Max wore a little bandana that read, "Official Trail Guide." At the end of the day, the county unveiled a brand new wooden trailhead sign, funded by a local grant. It read, "Willow Trail, a protected public land day open to all." It was my way of closing the loop. Karen watched the entire event from behind her blinds, peeking out like a cartoon villain. She didn't step outside, not once. After that, the flyers disappeared, the trash dumping stopped, and for the first time in what felt like ages she said absolutely nothing. The silence was jarring, but it was the kind I could live with. Weeks later, her house went on the market. The listing used careful, bland language: charming property at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac, friendly neighbors, scenic walking trail nearby. I chuckled at the irony. The same trail she tried to destroy was now being used as a selling point. I watched realtors bring potential buyers around, but none stayed long. I could only imagine her version of the tour. "Here's the porch, and just over there is the evil land baron who ruined everything with his wholesome walking path and overly friendly dog." But the truth was, I didn't need her to leave to feel satisfied. I didn't need to win. The trail was open. The land was respected. The community had seen the truth and chosen to stand for something better. Max still got daily belly rubs from strangers, and the once blocked path of forgotten and fenced now stood tall as a symbol of quiet resilience. Not because of ownership, not because of walls, but because people chose patience over rage, collaboration over control. As summer deepened, wildflowers crept along the edges of the trail. The sun filtered through the canopy with that unmistakable golden glow, the one that only appears when nature feels undisturbed. Max and I walked it each morning, not as guardians anymore, but simply because it was once again what it was always meant to be: a path, open, free, a place where people could pass without judgment, where even the most absurd conflicts eventually faded into the rustle of leaves and the steady crunch of honest footsteps. The first real sign that Karen was giving up wasn't the "for sale" sign in her yard. It wasn't even her permanently closed blinds. It was the silence where once there had been shouting. No more tirades to the mail carrier about HOA bylaws. No more yelling at joggers for stepping too close to her hedges. No more duct-taped signs on trash cans or trailside watchposts. She had become what she feared most: invisible. And finally peacefully irrelevant. People joked that Karen had finally moved into her own imaginary gated community. Even Max, my dog, seemed to notice the difference. He no longer growled when we passed her house. Instead, he wagged his tail, nose twitching at the smell of freshly cut grass. The air felt lighter now, like the whole neighborhood had exhaled a long-held breath. Then one afternoon, I got a call from Miguel, a newer member of the HOA, young and full of optimism. He'd been a key voice in pushing back against Karen's chaos. He told me the board wanted to hold a rededication ceremony for the trail and asked if I'd be willing to speak. I laughed and said I wasn't exactly a microphone kind of guy. "That's why they want to hear from you," he replied. So I agreed, not for the attention, but because it felt like the final page of a long, winding chapter. That weekend, they set up a small stage near the trailhead of folding chairs, a solar-powered PA system, and colorful ribbons tied to nearby trees. Kids made paper trail markers, and someone even brought cookies shaped like tiny hiking boots. The crowd was bigger than I expected. Local hikers, neighbors, county officials, even the ranger who had helped tear down Karen's checkpoint. When Miguel introduced me, the applause was genuine. I stepped up to the mic and kept it simple. I told them trails aren't just paths through dirt and trees. They're connections between places, between people. I spoke about the generations who had walked this land, a grandparent with grandchildren, joggers who met their partners on these bents, and the boy who once drew me as a caped hero just for keeping the gate open. I ended by saying, protecting something doesn't always mean building walls. Sometimes, it means tearing them down. When the applause faded, and people drifted into conversations, I walked the trail again, Max at my side. For the first time in months, I felt completely at ease. No threats, no tension, just peace. I stopped at the spot where Karen's gate had once stood. A bench had been placed there, and someone had attached a small plaque. It read, "For those who kept the path clear, a thank you." I didn't know who had put it there, but I smiled. Max curled up at my feet, content under the filtered sunlight. Later that evening, something strange caught my eye. Karen's yard was empty. No garden gnomes, no ceramic frogs, no furniture, just a moving truck in the driveway and her infamous clipboard tossed carelessly on the passenger seat. I never saw her come out. Maybe she left early, or maybe she didn't want an audience. By the next morning, she was gone. Her house sat quiet, an empty shell of control and resentment. But I didn't feel triumphant, just relieved. In the weeks that followed, the neighborhood found its rhythm again. The HOA, free of Karen's overreach, focused on real issues, fixing the broken mailbox, organizing cleanups. Miguel led a tree planting effort along the trail, and I helped plan trail expansions to connect to the larger green belt. Kids drew chalk art along the path again. Parents pushed strollers without having to explain why a woman in a vest used to scream about property lines. Even the squirrels seemed more relaxed. Then, one morning, I received an envelope. No return address, just a single piece of paper and a key. The note read, "I was wrong, you were right. Use this however you want." I stared at it for a while. Part of me thought it might be a prank, but I recognized the handwriting. The key, I discovered, belonged to the padlock Karen had installed on her illegal gate, the one long since removed. It was useless now, but symbolically a broken bar. It meant everything. I mounted it on a small wooden plaque and hung it in my tool shed, right beside the original trail map and a photo of Max in his official trail guide bandana. It was a reminder that even the most stubborn barriers can fall, and even the most stubborn people can change, even if only a little. Maybe Karen had learned something, or maybe she just didn't want to risk ending up next to another neighbor like me. As fall arrived, the leaves turned golden and orange, blanketing the trail in color. Max delighted in diving into the piles, scattering them with joyful chaos. People would stop to pet him, to chat, to share stories of their favorite trail moments. One woman said she'd met her fiancé copyright at the Trail Appreciation Day and asked if I'd host another in the spring. "Only if someone else brings the cookies," I replied. I'm not brave enough to bake. The neighborhood wasn't perfect, but it was better. There was trust again, laughter, even disagreements were handled like adults, without shouting, flyers, or duct-taped signs. The trail had brought us back to center. It reminded us that shared spaces don't need to be controlled, they need to be cared for. It wasn't mine anymore, it belonged to everyone, and that made it even more worth protecting. Max and I still walk the trail daily, sometimes in the early misty morning, sometimes at dusk, when the trees glow like stained glass. We've watched families grow, friendships blossom, a community rediscover itself. And every time I pass the spot where Karen once stood, shouting about trespassers and authority, I smile, not with spite, but because it's quiet now. The only sounds are footsteps, soft laughter, and the wind whispering through the branches above. And if you ever find yourself on the trail, if you see a border collie bounding ahead with a bandana flapping like a flaga, know that you're in the right place. The gate is gone, the road is clear, the fight is over, and the path is finally, fully, beautifully free.